Great. So let's get going now. I know people are trickling in, but we've got an exciting lineup today. So, hello and welcome, Friedman community. It's great to see everybody online. I know the auditorium is open for people who wanted to come in and listen there. But yeah, it's my pleasure today to introduce this seminar titled Amplifying Voices with Lived Experience of Hunger and Poverty. And I'd like to say this was recommended by a Friedman student, actually. So a big thank you to the student community who really is so instrumental in helping bring people to the speaker series. If other people do have ideas or connections, we always welcome them. And we're really delighted to have this group here with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing Alice Aluoch, who's the Senior Manager for Membership and Development at the Global Health Council. So in that role, she does recruitment, cultivation, and engagement of Global Health Council members. And these people are, essentially work together to speak powerfully and in a singular voice on critical global health issues. And she leads the partnership strategy on behalf of that same group. And so the group that actually was recommended to us is called the Community Partnership Group. And so Alice is a consultant with this Community Partnership Group under something called CLASS, which we're going to hear about in a minute. And that's a group of experts with lived experience who advocate for access to public benefits within institutions of power and decision makers. Together with Alice, we also have Tamika Moore, who's a lived experience expert, a youth empowerment leader, and an anti-hunger advocate. So she comes from New Jersey and works and does youth empowerment through her nonprofit organization VisionWorkz. And so she's contributed to the LGBTQ curriculum in New Jersey and works with LGBTQ youth to inspire and empower them to see their true potential and value. So she pushes to provide healthy and safe avenues for teens and adolescents to release their emotions on creative and functional basis. Tamika also provides technical assistance in the form of webinars, speaking engagements, and media requests regarding food insecurity, homelessness prevention, and poverty as a lived experience expert. And so she's also part of this community partnership group since it started in 2020, and we look forward to hearing more about it. So there will be time for questions at the end, but please, we look forward to active participation from everyone during this talk. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to both of you, Alice and Tamika. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for that awesome introduction. I'm sure we both greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So today we'll be discussing the importance of lived experience. We plan to have a brief open discussion with you all and then open up for questions and answers. Our first order of business is why. So why is it important to listen to and amplify the voices of those with direct experience of poverty? All right, and Alice is going to start us off with that.
Thanks, Tamika. And we are really excited to be here. I think Diana attended a SNAP conference. I think that was a CBP conference. And so some of us speak at that conference and recommended us, actually asked to come and speak in the space. So we're really excited to be here. This is what we'd love to do. And we hope the next 1 hour is going to be really exciting. And we hope we can share our expertise and knowledge based on our own experiences, but also based on the work that we do. So, in the nonprofit world, responding to what just Tamika said, there seems to be this never-ending divide between a group, there are those who are specifically focused on providing technical expertise or creating tools and instruments for what they believe is needed in the communities, right? And then on the other hand, we have those that really, truly seek to listen and understand the underserved communities in which we work. Now, I'll say, speaking from a person with lived experience, out of all the services, organizations, or nonprofits that are working to end poverty can provide, the most important is actually listening, right? So listening and responding to the needs of the people they serve. And, we've seen some people claiming that poverty is voicelessness, but what we do know is people experiencing poverty do not lack a voice. At least that has not been our experience. What we do lack is someone to listen to. And so any organization or institution that's designing programs or shaping policies without the input of the recipients is definitely setting itself up to fail. Now, similarly, we've also seen governments and institutions of power appearing to only respond to the interests of those who are powerful and the rich, right? And then on the other hand, we see them react in a very minimal way to the needs of people who are experiencing poverty, unless, of course, there's a threat of social unrest. And so this leaves nonprofits and other social organizations that are working within the grassroots communities as one of the few sectors that are well placed and very well positioned and honestly motivated to listen to people with a lived experience. However, in our experience, what we've seen over the last couple of years is that over time, without a lot of progress, organizations and institutions of power are waking up to these questions. How can you design solutions for people without their input? And how can you design solutions? How can you decide what's best for people without asking them? And I think what's even more powerful now is we're seeing people who've gone through this process, right? People with lived experience, people who've had access to public benefits, whether that's SNAP or Medicaid, getting to the point where they are actually speaking up and they're questioning systems. And so I think ultimately, as Ayanna Pressley very well phrased it, those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. And so people with lived experience not only understand the barriers and challenges they face, but we do also have the solutions. And we are willing to fight to dismantle systems of oppression that have kept us and generations to come in a poverty loop. And this is why it's really critical to involve people with lived experience. Tamika.
I think you covered pretty much everything there. I don't even know how to follow behind that. But no, honestly, there are so many reasons why, right? There's literally no better place to learn about an issue with a program or policy than from the individuals currently utilizing said programs, right? Or who are affected by the policies. I recall one issue. I do have lived experience. I experienced street homelessness and extreme poverty in that way a long time ago. And I remember I was asking, couldn't figure out, and I was homeless for a long time in the middle of Camden, New Jersey. I don't know y'all know anything about that, but I'm pretty small also in stature, so it's pretty scary. And I was very young. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get approved for benefits. I just kept going, trying to figure out, and I kept getting denied, went through 3 social workers, finally got to one that was willing to tell me, oh, you're not working and you're not in school. And I was like, but I'm homeless, So, but without somebody to tell you that and to share those types of things with you, you have no idea, So and that's a flaw in that policy and something that I've since fought against in New Jersey as far as that policy is concerned, and homelessness prevention and so on. But that's a flaw in the policy, right? How can somebody homeless that can barely take care of themselves, has to worry about how to eat, where to sleep and all of that, figure out how to get a job and you don't have a phone, you don't have access to different things. So it's very difficult. But anyway, so, they have firsthand knowledge is what I'm saying of the daily challenges, struggles, and complexities associated with these programs. By listening to their voices, you gain a far more authentic insight, that's often overlooked by those who have not directly experienced the same hardships. It just is what it is. Also, hearing personal stories humanizes the experience of food insecurity. Sorry. It goes beyond statistics. Those numbers are not people, goes beyond the stereotypes, and it fosters empathy and understanding. This actually can challenge the stigma associated with poverty and promote a more compassionate and inclusive society as well. And then it also addresses the power imbalance between the people and the powers that be. Right. There is certainly a power imbalance. And that's one of the root issues that we talk about all the time. You have to put people that are experiencing these issues in a place of power to be able to affect these policy changes as well. And I'll turn it back over to Alice.
Yeah, so we wanted to just share a brief overview of who we are. As it was mentioned in the opening introduction, we are a part of CPG, and CPG is a community partnership group. So we are a diverse collective of activists. We work from across the United States. We partner with nonprofits, institutions, etc., to ensure that their work is grounded in the expertise and experiences of people directly impacted by anti-poverty policies. We were founded by and convened by CLASP, and specifically by researchers on the Income and Work Supports team. And CLASP stands for Center for Law and Social Policy. So it's a nonprofit that's based in Washington, D.C. They do incredible work in advocacy and policy, with Congress. And we really work together with the name of dismantling the transactional and often traumatizing relationships between people with lived experiences of poverty and government agencies and nonprofit partners who really are designed to support us, right? And so over the last couple of years that we've been in existence, we've done a couple of things, right? And that we are pretty excited to share with you. One is we've participated in different public presentations. We've facilitated discussions, listening sessions. We've authored and co-authored different blogs. We have that on different websites, on the CLASP website as well. We've worked on policy briefs and reports on anti-poverty issues or policies of interest. We've worked with, the legislature. So we've worked very closely with Congress to push on specific policies that affect people in low-income communities on a day-to-day basis. We've consulted with external partners. And last year, primarily, we had the opportunity to attend the White House conference on food, nutrition, and hunger. So the President Biden's picture on the screen was when we were all attending that conference, and it was really a great honor for us to be in that space, really, and for us to see the administration expand to bring in marginalized voices in that space. And we've also, published a paper that we are very proud of, and that's the anti-racist vision on SNAP. And I'll let Tamika speak just very briefly on that, and then we'll get into the beef of the presentation.
Yes, the anti-racist vision for SNAP. So public benefits such as SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, provide critical care and support for families with low incomes. I'm sure we all know that. However, they also reinforce structures of oppression. Historical context shows that welfare reform in America is rooted in anti-Blackness, xenophobia, and other forms of racism, right? So there is these false narratives that policymakers are needed to make policymakers are needed to make discussions on the behalf of folks experiencing poverty. So we worked to develop a framework for how policymakers can and should make SNAP stronger and more effective in the upcoming Farm Bill. This framework and recommendations were written in collaboration with our CPG. We wanted to make sure our priorities were community-driven and advised by people who have received SNAP benefits and know firsthand how the implementation of such programs affect people on the local level. The publication was huge, okay? Everybody was talking, it was everywhere. It allowed us to envision a bold, transformative system that was not based on what is politically feasible, right? We have spoken at webinars, presented at conferences, shared our framework with congressional leaders and so on regarding this publication. However, this collaboration would not have been possible if there were not some essential structures already in place. Right. So, and that's what we'll talk about in the next section, best practices. So audience engagement. What are some of the best practices that organizations can implement to ensure that they are listening to and amplifying the voices of those with direct experience with hunger and poverty?
Yeah, thanks, Tamika. Thanks for sharing that. And we'll share the link on the chat. We can also send that on email for those who are interested in taking a look at the anti-racist vision for SNAP publication that we did 2 years ago. It's really being powerful in just even influencing what Congress is going to be doing with the Farm Bill as we push for that this year. So one of the things that we want to talk about a couple of things in terms of best practices. And as we mentioned, this really stems from one, our own lived experiences of poverty. I am an immigrant myself. I was born and raised in Kenya. And so I am very passionate about the challenges that affect immigrants in trying to access public benefits, especially within the first 5 years, where they don't qualify to do that, right? Even when you come here as a legal as a legal resident with a green card, you really do not have access to any of that, whether it's Medicaid or SNAP. You don't have access to that for the first 5 years. And as an immigrant, you know, that's like the foundational basis, is when you're trying to understand the culture, you're trying to get in the system, you're trying to get a job. And that's when you need the help the most. And that was my experience, you know, going to the benefits office to try and access SNAP to feed my children, and I wasn't able to do that. But I didn't know back then, and I was completely misinformed. I didn't even know I couldn't access that within the first 5 years. And that's why I get passionate about this work, because really a lot of people that are in this space are hardworking citizens, right? They're hardworking Americans, and we all are contributing to the economy, but for some reason, sometimes it's not enough what we have, and the support from the government could really be helpful. And so, you know, what we've done is really to bring them to your space and to your work. How is the best way to do that? And the first thing that I do want to talk about is relationship building. And I know this is a mix of faculty, and maybe we do have students in here as well. So some of you have not had a chance to be in the working environment yet, right? But you might actually be sent to an organization that is a nonprofit or an institution that actually is trying to build programs and policies to support people experiencing poverty. And maybe you're wondering, if I was sent in an organization like that, where would I start? And so the first thing is relationship building. What is important to understand is that relationships take time. Historically, minority, communities that have, that are experiencing poverty have been taken advantage of. We've seen organizations come to us for one specific reason, which is to take our experiences, to take our expertise and go use it for their own benefits. And for that reason, we get closed off. We don't want to share. We don't want to open ourselves to that because we've been taken advantage of. And so as you go into these communities, it's important to remember that relationships take time. One other thing to remember too is if you're trying to build relationships with that specific community, engage community leaders. Do you know people that exist in that community that could be defined as leaders? You can approach them and have them introduce you to the rest of the community so you can work with them and get the information that you need. Another way that you can be successful in doing this is also partnering with diverse organizations and agencies and have them lead the way. You don't have to create something new. If it's already existing, if the organizations that exist in these communities that work with the grassroots, you can directly build relationships with them and work with them to connect with the community. Drop the saviorism mentality, and this happens a lot. It's a complete turnoff. You go into a community with an attitude that you're helping, right? This is a helping relationship. This is charity. I'm here to do the good work, the Lord's work. That's going to fail, because when you approach people with the mentality that you're here to save them, it's not going to be successful. I think it's important to remember that a lot of these folks, they're qualified, they have their qualifications intact, they're learned, they have their own expertise. And so approaching it from a partnership perspective, but not, well, I'm here to save you, so how about you tell me about your story and your experience so I can take that story to a decision maker or to Congress and you can get what you need. That's going to fail. And then the last thing that I did want to mention, and we see this a lot happening too, is just be prepared to face discomfort, because a lot of times the conversations with people with lived experience will be uncomfortable, right? And the truth is, these communities have faced oppression for a lot of for years. They have been underserved for years. They've not had access equally to resources like everybody else. And when they will be blunt when they're talking about some of these issues. And so it's important to remember, as you go into these communities, just be ready to stay in the face of discomfort. And also remember that they've had to deal with discomfort for thousands of years. So if you come in, be flexible and be open enough to stay again within the face of discomfort. Tamika.
I can unmute. That'd be great. Okay, yeah, no. Truly. Now, creating a welcome and authentic atmosphere also is, another step in this process. You want to create a space that feels safe and welcomes people to show up as their true selves. And the only way to do that is to build trust. You have to build trust. If they don't trust you, they're not going to be open and honest with you and assist you with this. So you want everyone in the room to be comfortable with sharing their experience and their expertise. You have to make them feel safe, and also Alice said it perfectly, prepare to stay in the face of discomfort. That's an absolute fact, especially if you've never been in these environments, you never experienced the things that they've experienced. More than likely you're going to have several uncomfortable conversations, right? But the biggest and best power move in this position is to address the discomfort. Don't steer away from it. Address the discomfort, embrace it, and then come up with solutions together. Okay, so make sure to understand that this is the way we've always done it. Might not work for other cultural groups also. For example, trying to switch, you want to go ahead and try and switch the time of your event to accommodate a range of schedules, as opposed to just thinking that this one thing is going to work. A lot of people in these communities work different schedules. They work all kinds of jobs. You just never know. So flexibility is critical. And Alice will speak more on that topic as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tamika. And, adding to flexibility on, what Tamika just mentioned. So providing individuals with different means to participate, right? If you have an in-person session that you want people to attend, could you provide a transportation fee for that? If that's the only way for people to connect, is it possible for you to also provide like a virtual format, right, for the folks that are not able to attend? Or if you want to get feedback from folks that cannot attend, maybe then provide like feedback forms. And the goal really is to create different ways of engagement. So it's not a one size fits all, but you're being accommodative to the different ways that you want people to participate. I think the other thing to mention is, and I'll speak this specifically for immigrant communities, alternative methods of engagement. If you're reaching out with flyers that you have a specific event that's happening and you probably want to convene people, is it possible for you to translate it to a local language? Could be Spanish, could be anything else, but can you meet people where they are? The other thing that I think is important to mention too is maintaining presence within these communities. Don't wait for them to invite you. Do they have events that are happening? Go to those events. Don't make it about you. It's not just, oh, I have this event and I need you to come to this thing. How about maybe they have specific events happening? Go set a table, engage with them, learn their culture, and be part of them. And the last thing that I do want to mention, and I think this is really critical to mention, when you start working for an organization and you send out to go and build relationships with these communities, it's important to anticipate differences. The participants or the folks that you're working with and the organization goals could be very different, right? The goals that you set up in the organization that you're going to implement could be completely different from what the community needs. I think the most important thing to remember is that your goals and the community goals might not be aligned. And so be prepared to be flexible enough to go back to your boss, if you're not the boss, and say, we might need to overhaul this entire project because I thought we needed to maybe bring an advocacy training and train these folks to write to the media or to do interviews or to write letters to the members of Congress. But they actually don't need that. Maybe these folks need capacity building. Maybe what they need is actually training, right? And so figure out when you go to the community, let them lead. They, as we said, and Tamika mentioned this before, those that are closest to the, completely forgot that part, but those that are closest to the needs, those that have experienced the things that are happening in the communities, honestly, are the ones that need to be closest to the power, right? And so you need to talk to them and figure out what are the solutions. They know the solutions, so allow them to be the ones that lead in defining the solutions. And then the last thing that I do want to add is just being respectful. Don't hold events on programs or dates that correspond with religious or cultural holidays. It could actually reflect ignorance and could be another turnoff for these communities.
Facts, absolutely. And then also, well, again, my colleague was already talking about this, but definitely make space for people to lead and co-create, with them from the beginning of the project. So not just pulling people in, just getting their story banking and being like, oh, thank you, and letting them go ahead off. No, from the beginning of the project, you want to power share, co-create with them, give them the power, inform them of the structure and see what they have to say, and then let them inform you, learn from each other, and build something great together. You want to also acknowledge and address the power disparities among federal staff, partners, and individuals with lived experience. This is something that you want to address also in the beginning. Make sure that they understand that you're educated and you're trying to build something with them. Collaborate to empower those with lived experience, granting them not just a presence, like I was saying, but a significant role in the decision making across the program's entire life cycle. So, like I was already saying, involve them throughout the entirety of the process, include them in decision making as well. And then, the other part of that is the feedback loops. And I'm going to leave that to Alice to discuss with you guys.
Yeah, so in addition to what Tamika said, on including people in the entire process, it also does feel like exploitation if we share our stories and our experiences, and we really never get to know, did it help, right? Did it influence any campaign? So please close the loop. Did the information help? Did it move the needle? I think organizations need to implement a system of monitoring and evaluation and follow up to inform people with lived experience of the impact on their decision making, right? If I shared my story, did it make maybe a member of Congress sign on a specific legislation that's going to improve our lives? It's important to do that. And one other thing that Tamika had also mentioned in terms of co-design, I think what has happened and what we have seen happen also is a lot of organizations refer to co-design, co-production, co-creation. All of these words are just banded as a checkbox exercise, right? Because you had someone with a lived experience in your table, we're just going to check that box that we co-created with them. But are you really doing the right thing? And I think that's the other thing, to just make sure that you're not just using quote unquote these words, but you're actually involving them in the process, and that whatever they contribute to the process will really be used to influence the final decision making. Tamika?
Yeah, and if any of y'all have ever seen me speak before, I'm going to say this like I always say it. Pay them, pay these people, pay them just like you would anybody else that you are hiring to create a training or to create a program or whatever, what have you within your organization. Pay these people equitably, make sure there are enough resources allocated so that people are compensated properly for their time, you know. So before, when you're um creating a project and you know that you want people with lived experience involved in that process, make sure that you have the resources available to pay these people equitably ahead of time. Don't pull them in and then be like, oh, well, I don't know what we're going to do or how we're going to pay them, or do you mind volunteering, or whatever the case is. No, pay them. Also, going back to flexibility, right? Make sure you have the means to pay people in, unconventional ways as well, like Uber credits or DoorDash gift cards, Visa gift cards, even though I hate gift cards. However, that is, the last thing you want to do is jeopardize someone's resources, right? People who receive public benefits have to report their income, and if you start making more than a certain amount of income for the threshold, they can lose their food assistance benefits or other benefits as well. So we like to avoid this by compensating people in different ways. So just give them the option. They might be like, no, I want that cash, but either way, give them the option and make sure that you are able to pay these people equitably. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add real quick on what Tamika said, to say the organizations that are doing this very well. I would say, because both of us were founding members of CPG, which was really founded by CLASP, the Center
Right.
for Law and Policy. They've done an incredible job in really involving us from the start, right? In terms of the pay, and discussing what was comfortable, and even creating that space where we actually felt comfortable to have that conversation. And not only was that helpful to us, just in terms of feeling like we were being paid for the job that we were doing, but it also honestly set a platform for us as we went, a foundation, as we've continued to partner with different organizations. We know the value that we bring, and it's really important, because then when you feel valued in the work that you do your best. And so again, I just wanted to reinforce what Tamika mentioned.
That's facts. I actually have a background in business and took the time to go over the financials with them to figure out what would be more equitable for us moving forward. So the fact that they provided a platform, like Alice said, to where I was comfortable to be able to say, hey, let me take a look at this with you and try and figure out how we can be paid more equitably. That's definitely a plus. CLASP has done really, mostly all the right things in co-creating this cohort with us. So it's been a great journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to go ahead and ask the questions?
Sure. So we know we've done a lot of talking to you
Yeah.
all, and this was a lot of information. So we wanted to just take a pause, and we will definitely have space at the end for you to ask us questions. But we just wanted to take a pause here and ask, if you're a student or a faculty in the space, and you had a chance to work or volunteer with an organization in this space, based on what you've learned today or some of the things that we shared from our own experience, how would you advise that organization to incorporate people with lived experience into your work or your research, and why? And feel free to just pick up.
Yeah. Don't be shy.
I'd like to also just say, this is Erin, helping with moderating. There's a question for you in the chat too, and so you could even take a look at that while we wait for people to offer some reflections. And for everyone online, you can feel free to raise your hand. I would also, the speakers, I don't know if you could see, but you were getting some applause emojis during the bit about paying people, just so that in case you didn't see it.
That's awesome. I'm glad that we feeling that, because yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pose a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Larissa, go ahead, hon.
I was going to jump in, but just to say that this is really, really powerful and such important information. So thank you so much for taking the time to share, this wisdom with us. I'm a faculty member here, and I've done quite a bit of research with community members, and I've had the privilege of being able to work with people who incorporate a lot of this work. And so I sort of got to see it in practice as I was learning as a student. And I, personally, I really value working with people who have lived experience. I think you get, as you were saying, better outcomes. You're less likely to make really big mistakes. You're increasing trust in science, in, efforts to make the world a more just place. And so I really appreciate this. And it's hard. And as you said, it takes time, it takes thoughtfulness. And I think, as someone who's in academics, partnering with organizations who have really strong foundations in places, really good connections, that has helped us kind of do the work really authentically, I think. So thank you very much for sharing this.
You're welcome, and thanks for your feedback.
Yes, yes, thank you so much. I'm gonna pose a question as well. All right. So what is one thing that you will take away from this session? Maybe that's an easier question.
I think so too. I think the other one is super loaded.
It is, right? Maybe y'all can email us the answer to that one. But what is one thing, if anything, you'll take away from this session?
Hi, this is Sean Cash. I'm also a faculty member here at the Friedman School, and I partially responding to your prompt here and also picking up on something that Dan Schultz just shared in the chat box as well. I really love some of the very practical and very grounded recommendations you both gave here, and I took some notes on that, and I thought of things where that might have made some of my own work easier in the past, but I've been thinking of some of those things more explicitly up front. But as Dan noted, there are some frictions around, sometimes from funders and federal guidelines, sometimes from institutional constraints for us at a university. And I was wondering what experience or recommendations you might have when we're having those conversations with our finance people about why we want to have 5 different payment methods on option, or in terms of being responsive and trying to exercise some of the flexibilities that you've so nicely laid out are so important in order to be successful with this work. But that sometimes conflicts with federal funders who want to see the methods laid out before they even say yes to the funding, right? So then puts us in a bureaucratic nightmare sometimes of trying to having to go back, file changes and things like that. So do you have experience with that or recommendations for how to, how to follow the rules, but also try to change the system that complicates it?
Absolutely. You want to take this question, or you want me to take it, Alice?
Go for it.
Okay. So just honestly, we have plenty of experience with this. And the best way is to be honest and to say, we don't want people to lose their benefits. You know what I mean? Like this is not something that federal funders don't know. So if you say, hey, listen, we have to provide these different methods because it's what's convenient for the individuals that we're trying to empower, or whatever verbiage you want to use, but this is what's the most beneficial for them so that they won't lose their benefits, they will absolutely understand that. You know what I mean? Just make sure that you some of this stuff doesnof have to be sugar coated either, right? Like we get so caught up in all of the I don't want to say the proper or bureaucratic forms and functions of these different organizations or government entities and stuff like that. No, they know. Trust me, they know. So just lay it out for them exactly like that. These people have to fall within this this guideline. We can't have them losing their benefits, and see how that works out. We've had a lot of success with that. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. We have a hand on Zoom and a hand in the auditorium, actually. So do we want to do auditorium first, and then we'll do the Zoom hand?
Sure, whatever works for you.
My name is Gabriel Waitaka. I'm a student doing humanitarian assistance here at Friedman School. I like the session and what has been said, but I wanted to ask a question because I see the sensitivity is more focused on the US. What about outside the US, especially where you're saying pay the people, yet we know different organizations have different rates and probably competing for the same audience? That's one concern. The other thing that I've liked about this session is the fact that we have to be empathetic, because here in the US, I have experienced something very simple and at the university level, where you're asking a question, but instead you're just directed, this is a requirement. No clarification until you get frustrated at the wrong time when you're so busy. And then eventually when the person gives you a chance to speak, then they get to realize, oh, this is really something that needs to be clarified. So I think it's important to be sensitive to different communities, because if you're used to systems, maybe technology-based, not everyone is experienced in that. And I think that's what I would want to take away. And I'm commending one of the staff here. He actually walked me to some places to get a solution to the problem that I was dealing with. So thank you so much for this session, and please advise on how you can deal with the issue of paying participants when there are different rates and you're competing for the same audience.
Wonderful. Thanks, Waitaka, for that question. That name sounds very familiar. And I say that because I'm Kenyan, so I do think that's a very familiar Kenyan name. So I will say specifically for CPG, we obviously have worked, of course, within the US region, and so that most of our expertise comes from that. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I am an immigrant, so I was born and raised in Kenya, and I started this work even when I was in Kenya. And I will say we have to be the change that we want to see, right? Because a lot of times you've probably been in this space now, and based on this presentation, you've learned that it's important for people to be paid when they're bringing their own lived experience in this space. And it's a loaded question, because paying them is one thing, and then organizations also need to have structure. You cannot have people sharing their own stories if as an organization you don't have the structure to support them emotionally, because again, you can be re-traumatizing them through this process. And so the thing that I'll add on all of this is to say, based on my own experience, I worked for an organization initially where we were advocating directly with Congress. And the one thing that I quickly learned when I joined that organization is, even though we were advocating for global health issues, and it was global health, global nutrition, all of that, just really globally focused, we did not have the right voices in the space. And even though we had a lot of people showing up in front of Congress, it wasn't people with lived experience globally. And so my goal was to build a team that would be able to do that. And so I started working with the African diaspora. My first mistake, and I'll share this because this was my own experience, was I built this program not thinking about the pay. This is why I'm very adamant about this at this point. But we built this program from the point of, I joined this work out of passion. I grew up in a low and middle income country, in a developing country. And so I got to experience poverty firsthand, and I was always driven in this work out of passion. And when I started building this program, it was also driven from me thinking, well, everybody's passionate. And we had all these African diaspora leaders in different states that I convened together to provide them, as I thought, with this opportunity to get in front of members of Congress and speak about their own, experiences, and why we needed to continue supporting funding or legislation that would make a difference in our own countries. The thing that I didn't understand on the onset is I should have thought about their time, their expertise, and what they were providing. And midway through the program, and in me also being engaged in CPG, I learned I did this wrong. And I had to own it and go back to my bosses and say, we did this the wrong way. And it's unfortunate because when you have communities that sometimes might not be empowered, right? As you know, for me, as somebody who came from a different country, I thought, oh, what a privilege. I'm getting in front of my senator, not knowing the power that I actually also brought in that space. We went back and recalibrated that entire program, and we actually paid folks from the first day that they started working with us. And it was a hard lesson for me to learn. But right after that, I've always had to do things the right way. And so this is to say we are all human. You know, sometimes we're not always going to get it right. But when you get it right, then fix it. Internationally, if you're working specifically in a country, a lot of that will be determined by the different organizations, right? And so when I said, you know, sometimes we have to be the example that we want to see, is you might be working with an organization that doesn't think they need to pay, that they don't see the value in what people are bringing. And so I do think this is where I think advocacy honestly plays a critical role, is when you learn better, then you do better, right? When you know better, you do better. So you keep advocating and you train or you talk to them about what's necessary. And I would say specifically as somebody who's come from Kenya, I know because of poverty, people will just take opportunities for the sake of taking because you think it will elevate you to a point, and it does at some point. But if you have the knowledge, then you can take that knowledge back and honestly just push those organizations to do the right thing.
Thank you.
I hope that was
Really
helpful.
powerful. No, that's amazing. We have two hands up online. So Yellen, do you want to go next?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Tamika and Alice, thank you so much for the presentation. I learned a lot. So on the point of green card holders cannot access public benefits such as SNAP and Medicaid, the usual alternative to go to food banks or to go to clinics that offer free services. So my question is, have you considered the access inequality in food bank services? And how could food banks provide their services through a trauma-informed lens?
Yeah, trauma-informed lens, and thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Do you want to go?
Nope. Go girl, because I'm like,
go ahead and then feel free to jump in.
I'm actually going to leave that to you, Alice, but we do have experience with that. That is something that several members of the CPG have worked on and worked with different food banks. There's food banks across the country that are actually that do have specific foods, like culturally foods that are different, you know, for different cultures and stuff like that, that are culturally driven. And then other food banks are not, they simply don't have the capacity or the funding. It's difficult in different areas to not even to inform these food banks of the fact that they do need to be more culturally appropriate with the food that they're offering, but it's the funding for these different food banks in the different areas that they're in that make it more difficult, to be honest, in a lot of cases that I've seen, in a lot of cases. And then also there is plenty of food banks that do need the education and the information. And once they get it, they have been, you know, making these changes. There's just so many, and there's so many, you know, this goes back to it taking time, to be honest, because this is something that is currently being worked on across the country, across different food banks in different states and areas. And it's, yeah, it's crazy, to be honest. It's a lot, you know, but a lot of them are changing, and there's a lot more access to culturally appropriate food than you would think at this point. And it's getting better day by day, to be honest with you. But yeah, that is something that's been considered. Alice, you want to take over? But yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Tamika.
Yeah.
I did feel like this was a loaded question, only because I feel like it sort of has like two layers to it.
Yeah.
So one of it is like the food bank being an alternative, and then the trauma-informed lens is a whole complete discussion
Right.
that would take like a whole other topic. So yeah,
Girl,
I
that's,
mean, I'm going to try and
I ain't even touched the trauma informed part because I'm like, girl,
yes,
it's time for that.
this is yeah, it's a lot. But I will so let me speak just on the food bank side of things, because of course we've had a chance to work with different food banks. In terms of like recommendations on what we think would be helpful to communities, I think just having like central locations, right? For easy access of food, for communities that are, or people that really are experiencing poverty, accessibility. You know, some of these folks don't have transportation. We also easily forget folks who are, you know, differently abled, which means they probably don't have a way of transportation to get to the specific locations. And one of the ways that food banks could actually, you know, think about is just creating accessibility. Can you, is there a way for them to get to communities that don't have a way to come to them? And then the other thing that I think we've also discussed internally is really synchronizing data. So as someone who is trying to access these benefits, right? If you're probably qualifying for SNAP, probably you'll qualify for Medicaid. Is there a way for this benefit offices to honestly synchronize data with food banks? If somebody has or qualifies for SNAP, is that information being sent to food banks? Are they tracking data very closely with benefits offices to make sure that that information is being shared across, and you don't have to have somebody come in there and then have to redo the whole documentation again? So they're tracking on both sides. So that, I think that's the other thing that I think isn't like as it should be, and that is like just the alignment of data between all these offices that should be providing support. In terms of the trauma-informed lens, and I say this is quite a deeper discussion than this, I mentioned, you know, when we, and I know your question was specifically on permanent residents, there's a lot of misinformation in our communities, right? For example, when the public charge came out, everybody that was accessing SNAP, Medicaid, anything else stopped accessing that. Why? There was a lot of fear in our own communities because people were told, if you don't have your green card, or if you have your green card and you don't have your citizenship yet, if you access SNAP, it's going to bar you or hinder you from getting your citizenship, right? And even in families where kids were actually born in America and they're American citizens, and they honestly had access from the time they were born, could access, you know, WIC and all of those things, parents stopped doing or trying to get access for them. And so the other thing that maybe a food bank could do is just information. How are you relaying information to the community so there's not so much confusion, and that families are not missing out on nutritious meals or taking their kids to the hospitals because they're just afraid that they're not going to get their citizenship. So I feel like it's a lot, but it's an amazing question. I think it does need to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And as you're saying, it's just a lot of moving pieces, but I think those are some of the things that immediately come to my mind in terms of what, you know, the role that the food bank could play, because it's really situated in communities and it could have a big impact.
It really is. I'm going to piggyback real quick because I see Noel has his hand up, but real quick. And I think that from a trauma informed perspective, the sharing of information between SNAP and the, I don't know why I can't think today, y'all. I'm drinking
food
all
bank.
this. It's just so much that I want to share, and it's just moving too fast. That ADHD is serious. But so between SNAP and food banks and all of that, I think that also can help as far as being trauma informed, because then they don't have to go and, like Alice said, restate their story or why they need the assistance or any of that when they fill out the application or talk to whoever they need to talk to get the food, to get those benefits. That is such a big thing right now, is trying to get that documentation shared so that individuals don't have to go through this over and over again. So I hope that helped and answer your question.
Yes, amazing perspective. Thank you.
Awesome.
Hi, this is Noel. The original question on the table is what comment should I take back from this meeting? And I'll tell you. And the comment is how this trauma has provided wisdom. Your lived experiences provided wisdom beyond the wisdom of other people. It has to interact, however, with trade-off. As Sean said, there are trade-offs, there are structural trade-offs. And so where it needs to go is in recognizing the necessity for trade-off in a more kind of direct manner. Now, you're talking about your bread and butter, literally and figuratively now, and SNAP and food assistance and kitchens. I'm very interested in the anti-racism, quote unquote, aspect of SNAP. I mean, can you delineate what are the specific drawbacks in SNAP that are anti-racist, that are necessary because of government trade-offs like the USDA and the Congress, and so on. So that's my takeaway. Wisdom beyond your belief.
Thank you. Thank you.
But can I have an answer? Specifically on your analysis of anti-racism in the context of SNAP, if you will.
Ooh, that is another loaded question.
But it's in your title, so
it sure is. And you, boy, whew, that's a loaded question, Mr. Knoll. Man, where did we start with this?
Okay, the first.
Okay.
I can jump in, and just and just offer, perspective, and I will say this, based on what we articulated. Again, as I mentioned, we'll share the publication on the link. I don't know if you can pull it, Tamika. So what we do know historically.
I think if it's the right one, I just put a link in the chat for people.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. So, historically, we know that welfare reform in America is rooted in anti-Blackness. That's what we mentioned earlier, xenophobia, and other forms of racism. And that's what we've articulated in the publication. Some of the things, like when you think about the Jim Crow rules, right? Back then, when they talked about the Black mommy and the assumption that a Black woman that was actually trying to access benefits like SNAP would come to the benefits office dressed in a fur coat and driving a Cadillac. All these assumptions, they're rooted back in slavery. And so what we've seen, even though we've seen a lot of progress, there's also a lot of assumptions in terms of who, even from, back then, was trying to access SNAP. A lot of these welfare benefits were not even necessarily cut out for Black people, right? From the beginning, when we saw, the military and a lot of folks go to the war, back then, it was actually supposed to support wives that were left home with their children. And a lot of this were white women, right? Left with their children and their husbands who were sent out to war. That's the history of benefits. It wasn't necessarily meant for people of color. But then the narrative started back then, and that's what we try to address in our publication, that over time, it's ended up, being framed like that, people of color, Black people are lazy and they don't want to work. Now we're seeing work requirements in SNAP where you have to actually work for a certain amount of hours for you to be able to access SNAP. And as Tamika also mentioned, when you surpass those hours, then you don't even get access to SNAP, right?
Yeah.
So are we helping people, or are we actually keeping them in a poverty cycle? And that's what we need to fight: the continuous misinformation, the assumptions on why people are actually accessing these benefits, even the assumption that people don't work, and people actually are working 2 or 3 jobs, and sometimes it's not even enough. Yeah. And so, as Tamika mentioned, it's deep and it's a lot. I think we've done presentations that were specifically just to address the anti-racist the
Mhm.
racism and you know, when it comes to welfare benefits, but that's just like a small chunk of what it is.
Girl, yes. And not to mention, when all of that started, when SNAP was first implemented and they were doing all of that with the Black women legally had to work at that point. Like, I just want to throw that out there too. A lot of that you know, that was driven towards Black women specifically, like she said, with the fur coat and the this and the that. It was just, it's incredible to me how that was even a thing at that time, because Black women weren't even allowed to stay at home. It was against the law for them to not work at that time. You know, so I just was like, this is, you know, so dating back, and then now you see a lot of these people will post pictures of individuals on welfare with full fridges and be like, oh my God, I wish I had this and I wish I had that. It's like, it's incredible how all of these years later, we are still in a similar place as where we were with anti-Blackness and racism and all of that, these stigmas and that just continue to perpetuate. It's unbelievable, to be honest, but we're truly always trying to break through those stigmas and you know, move the needle. But yeah, check out
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I know we've hit our time. I imagine there would be a longer discussion on this actually if we had time. And apologies if my audio is a bit echoey over here. But can we just say thank you? I know we could do a virtual applause for our speakers. But unfortunately, we can't hear actual real applause. But this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. People have been saying, "Wow, thank you so much for this speaker series. This has been just really wonderful for our community to get to hear. So thank you so much to both of you, and we look forward to getting into all of this and trying our best to implement your recommendations across all of our work. So thank you. It's been inspiring.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.